Welcome to today's Sunday School. Pause the video to discuss what you think. The topic for today is the Call of Gideon. Lesson scriptures are Judges 6 verses 1 to 2 and verses 7 to 16. The golden text is Judges 6 verse 23. Say after me, the Lord said to Gideon, peace. Do not be afraid. You are not going to die. After today's lesson we should be able to tell how sin affects our nation. Mention the various types of excuses people give when called to assume leadership. Agree on one or more ways to avoid false thinking over whether God is or not with us. Have you found yourself not knowing what to do between fight, flight or freeze? There are guides from the scriptures. There are examples in the scriptures of right and wrong conduct in that regard. See, the Word of God remains a reliable guide in such situations. Now stop to think. Have you made sure that the opposition you face is not the response of God to your sin? Another thing, do not let the stories of mighty acts of God in the scriptures make you think that those are the only ways God does his things. In very many small ways, God over the years has done great things through the faith and generosity of believers in their little ways. When people of faith answer the call of God, unexpected opportunities for service come as a blessing to them. First lesson, oppression. Read Judges 6 verses 1 to 2. Look at the way the relationship between God and Israel had been. The Israelites sinned, God punished them with foreign oppression. Then they repented, a deliverer came, and peace followed. The Midianites were the oppressors in this text today. They shared a common history with Israel. The 7 years of oppression seemed short compared to other oppressions. Some lasted up to 40 years. Most evil Israel was guilty of his idol worship. See, the land of Israel had both large and small caves. Some were natural and some were man-made. When there was a threat, they ran there for protection. Strong places of refuge with difficult access were called strongholds. What do you think? Are bad and wicked leaders punishment from God to our nations? How can you tell the difference between punishment by God for sin or the result of living in a world of iniquity when times are hard? Second lesson, prophetic deliverance. Read Judges 6 verses 7 to 10. The prophet sent by God reminded the Israelites of the warning of God not to worship the gods of the Amorites. Do you remember the story of Israel in the book of Exodus? How they departed out of slavery in Egypt? Though many generations had come and gone, the current oppression by the Midianites was a taste of what their ancestors passed through in the period of slavery in Egypt. Now the prophet was reminding the people of Israel of the God who had delivered their ancestors. See, God by his great power had formed and settled Israel as a nation. In those days the people wanted to make sure no God was not worshipped and ignored by mistake. So it was strange to talk of worshipping one and only one God. Now that a cultural practice is commonly accepted does not mean that God approves of it. It amounted to disloyalty to God to worship idols. It meant that Israel had done away with what Moses taught them many years earlier. What do you think? We are to speak the truth in love. How do you apply it to warn people of the judgment of God? What do you do when people then send you away as being a judge? Third lesson, the Call of Gideon. Read Judges 6 verses 11 to 16. Have you ever been worried that Christmas no longer brings to mind the birth of Jesus? Thoughts of turkey, chicken, fun trips and purchases first come to mind when talking about Christmas. But do you know that in your own little way you can make a difference? Begin to emphasize the Christ in Christmas. Talk about it. Do things that show it. So we can do away with complaining about situations that are not favorable. This will open our minds to various possibilities for us to explore prayerfully. Now enter a heavenly messenger sitting under an oak tree belonging to Josh. Gideon was hiding threshing wheat because of the oppressive treatment from Midianites over crops from Israel. Know something? The Lord is with you when you are with him. If you seek the Lord, he will be found by you. Now if you forsake the Lord, he will forsake you. Hear Gideon asking why God had not delivered them from oppression. Gideon did not seem to remember that what was happening was a just punishment for their sins. Some people respond like Gideon to life experience. The great deeds of God look empty before the person at that time. Notice that the strength desired by Gideon would meet him as he went where God sent him. Looking at his lineage as not being significant, Gideon objected to the call of God. In those days, a leader needed family connections and alliances with other families. This gave them a power base, and Gideon felt he did not have it. Now he got the strongest assurance he could get: I will be with you. See, we are answerable to God and not He to us. God may sometimes only tell us what is next. He may not answer our why questions. We may sometimes get into trouble running ahead of God, thinking we know what is next. Wisdom is when we learn from the mistakes of others. Experience is when we learn from our mistakes. The Lord still calls us to serve. He still says that He is with us. What do you think? What is the importance of the presence of God in the life of a person? Are there spiritual gifts you are not using? How would you go about using them? When you believe God has called you to do something, how do you cross-check it is from God? Now remember these: any heart that turns away from God is lost. Such a heart is lost both from what is good and what is great. Sin takes courage away from any person. It makes one go into hiding in dens and caves. God sent a special messenger to deliver an important message to Gideon. When we blame others for our problems, we have taken the easy way, which does not solve our problems. We must make ourselves accountable for our actions. Our first action should be confession to God of sins that may have created our problems. Let all that sin expect to suffer. The day of greatest distress is God's time to appear for the relief of His people. The presence of God is enough to make any person mighty in valor and to give a person courage at any time. Persons who receive commissions from God must expect and seek instructions from Him. It is a delight to God to raise the humble. Dear friend, open up your heart to the Spirit of God. Accept that you have not been living right. Believe that Jesus Christ can save you from guilt and shame and sin. Confess with your mouth that you need Jesus in your life. Join a community of those determined to live right with God through Jesus Christ. I am grateful to the Nigerian Baptist Convention for their Sunday School Manual, the Standard Lesson Commentary, Life Application Bible and Matthew Henry's Commentary.